Welcome to Brooklyn Savvy, where we have vital conversations that lead to understanding and deeper connections. I'm Toni Williams, your host. We're going to delve into the evolving concept of masculinity, especially as it relates to African American males. We begin by exploring the historical context of traditional masculinity, characterized by traits such as stoicism, dominance, and emotional suppression. These societal expectations have long influenced male identity and behavior, often leading to adverse effects on mental health and interpersonal relationships. Informing and challenging these norms are our distinguished guests, Rasu, Jilani, Daoud Abeid, Brian Vines, and Chenjerai Kumanyika bring diverse perspectives to this critical conversation. I wanted to create a safe space to have uncomfortable yet transformative conversations that move people, amplifying the voices of those who are underrepresented and who inspire positive change. I'm Toni Williams, and this is Brooklyn Savvy. Well, this is a first for Brooklyn Savvy. This is something I've wanted to do for quite some time. Hear from the voices of our brothers, okay? I really wanted to do that, so thank you all for joining. Now, in this discussion, we're going to be talking about redefining masculinity. And I was at this female-centric event when I mentioned that I was going to do a show on this, and this friend of mine said, yes, please do, because men are being effeminized, black men, by Hollywood. So I want to hear each of you give me your feedback on that. Do you see that happening on television, the images of black men? I'm going to start with you, Brian.
Short answer, no. And I'm sure it's a thread we'll pull on later. That woman, whether she is aware of it or not, may be such an active agent of the patriarchy that she is enforcing tropes and things that are keeping those very men that she wants to set free to be men in shackles.
Interesting. Rasu, what do you think?
I think it's a complicated story because we're going to hang on to whatever narrative fits our narrative, right? So if we look through the lens of a quote-unquote traditional masculinity, I can understand how somebody will be threatened by a different form of masculinity that is portrayed by the media. But I think what's happening is there's a diversity, dangerous word nowadays, a diversity of masculinity that is being portrayed, and it triggers something in people, right? But with that said, we also are in a capitalistic structure that is going to capitalize on whatever identity is selling.
Chenjerai.
Well, you know, I deal in the realm of the media, so I don't think that men are being effeminized, and I would agree with what's been said so far. I do think that Hollywood has a long tradition of trying to render black people as kind of clowns, and one of the modalities of the clown is to try to also not take the feminine seriously. You do see sometimes, you know, men being put in skirts in that kind of zone.
We see that a lot.
We see it a lot, but I would also say that, you know, what I don't like, I think sometimes when black people say that, I mean, I don't like it when they say that because I think that is really harmful to a wider range of masculinity. But I think when people say that, they're trying to reach for things like they see black men not being responsible, or they're trying to see them, there's other things they're reaching. The problem is that now you're associating the feminine with irresponsibility. You're associating the feminine with weakness. You're reproducing that, and I don't think feminine is any of those things. So I don't really like that way of talking about whatever people are seeing.
Certainly. Daoud.
Yeah,
Because I was just thinking of Tyler Perry and Medea as he was talking. But that's okay. Hey.
It's a complicated thing to address. It's very nuanced. In this society, we're taught that normalcy is healthy. And the reality that most normalcy, most media is weaponized against us. So most things in the media I question. The language is limited, so similar to what this brother said, like we'll use feminine as weak. You know what I'm saying? And that's a problem. I don't think that necessarily that men are being feminized, but I do think we're being weakened by the media.
Let's talk about that a little more. Because I think that might be what she was trying to say in an awkward way.
It's as simple as like the archetypes that are displayed. The messaging we get from media subconsciously, it impacts our ideals and our beliefs and the way we show up. And if we really look at what's going on in media, is it really stuff to make us stronger, healthier, you know what I'm saying, more balanced people? I don't think so. I think it's really like a lot of irresponsibility, or a lot of selfishness, a lot of self-centeredness, and you know, that I wouldn't say is a feminine thing, right? But I think that like with the Tyler Perrys and with all that type of stuff, people see some things wrong, but they might not have the scope of language to describe exactly what it is.
Let's talk about masculinity from a historical perspective. I was reading this article and it talked about like these 11 norms, you know, dominance, suppression of emotion. I mean, a number of traits or norms that men had to buy into. Can you frame that up for us?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked that, because, you know, I think most of us just experience masculinity as something that, you know, you're just living. Maybe it's something that you learned from the men around you. I learned from my brothers, from my father. But the question is, where did they learn it from, right? Because they didn't invent those things. And where did the people who taught them learn it from, right? If we find out that the people who created these definitions of masculinity didn't have our interests at their best, you know, at heart, and then we find out that these definitions aren't serving us, why would we be doing this?
Right.
So a lot of where masculinity comes from, I mean, there's a lot of historical work if you want to go way down into the rabbit hole, but people talk about as societies changed, as agriculture became a thing, as people tried to acquire power, you started to see, you know, people who have, you know, male bodies start to try to define certain roles. Like societies might have said, we need people to make a lot of babies to do a lot of labor. So suddenly women who formerly weren't, that wasn't really their role, like patriarchy wasn't forever, right, are now cast that way. You also see societies that are like, men need to go to war. We need people to go to war. Now, the person who's sending you to war ain't thinking about what's healthy for you. They want you to be a body, to be a soldier, to go out there and build their empire, right? But then that becomes something that you learn to be proud of, your ability to endure violence. So, of course, capitalism wants all of us to be beasts of burden. And certainly capitalism and colonialism have wanted black people to be beasts of burden, men to be out there, to be kind of like sexualized beasts of burden, working, slaving, building those empires. So in a lot of ways, it's those legacies. I would also throw various kinds of versions of religion in there without trying to, without throwing religion in there. So this is where this is coming from. And I think that what we have to do is say, okay, now that we have the ability to look at that, do we want to continue to reproduce those definitions?
Right. What do you think about that,
Yeah, to
Rasu?
piggyback off of that, what Chenjerai is saying, you know, roles are adopted based off the system that they serve, right? So we live in a hyper-capitalistic society. We live in a patriarchal society. We live in, you know, a historical white supremacist society. The roles are going to fit what feeds that system. And I think that's what you really have to analyze, is what roles feed what system across the world. And then you're going to kind of find your answer. So historically, if we just look at the Americana view of like masculinity, you see everything from, you know, the Western cowboy spit, you know, tobacco and, you know, robbing trains and smacking their women and things like that, right? Fast forward to, you know, the Great Depression into this new revolutionary man, where it's like the stoic man. You don't show your emotions. You don't even show your emotions to your woman. Then it kind of grows from there. And then for me, when I particularly look at black masculinity and how, and whatever that is, right? Then you get into like the 80s and it's the bravado, the Schwarzenegger, the Mr. T's, and so on and so forth. Wrestling is prominent, right? The action hero is prominent. So that became—
So capitalism is driving all of this.
You're buying G.I. Joes and He-Man.
Right.
So you're looking at how the system drives our views of gender. Now we're getting into the 80s and 90s, is post-crack era, right? Now it's this hyper-masculine, toxic, I'm in your face, you know, spitting at the cameras, whatever, new masculine. So as capitalism is driving the roles of not just gender, the roles in society, you're seeing how it actually feeds and sells to those roles.
Brian, you
Yeah, because obviously there's all this historical context and precedent for that up to right now. And when we talk about capitalism, we can't unshackle that from the racism that you talked about.
Absolutely.
Because none of this is in the context of us. Like 5 minutes ago, you heard a lot about this crisis of masculinity that was happening. But every single crisis of masculinity has been driven from the vantage of what the market demands and how threatened the hegemonic masculinity of white men is. If you look at something like 1890, when the Boy Scouts were invented to get rid of the feminizing grasp of women because men were suddenly driven into factories and away from the family dynamic of we're working and toiling together. They're spending all day in factories. Men are home by their mom's apron strings, these boys. So let's get them in the woods with other boys and men. It's a Boy Scout. Get them away from that kitchen. So this is when white masculinity was under threat and there was a crisis, up to the moment of right now where white masculinity is in crisis. And it's not enough for a man to be masculine. Corporations, which by the Supreme Court definition are people now. Number one, the crisis that white men are facing at this moment is ceding any of that power that they have been privy to for as long as they've stolen this country and tried to subjugate everyone else, right? So they have been the holders of this power. And if they held 98% of it, if 97% of it is in their grasp now, it's a crisis because we're losing too much. So as any person who is not a white hegemonic view of masculinity threatens their view of dominance and being able to subjugate, that means that we're in crisis. So you're going to turn your kid gay if they heard a drag show. Their school and teachers and every influence in the world is against them because they feel like they are losing their power, which is why we've seen the political and social upheaval that they're trying to arrest upon us, because the very real threat of not having that power. And like any rat in its last fight, that's when they're fighting the hardest. So we are currently in a crisis of masculinity because that ideal of masculinity is at stake.
So what do we do at a moment like this? And I'm going to look right at you, Chenjerai. and Daoud, in listening to Brian, you know, I start to feel a little hopeless, like this power structure is bigger than we are.
That wasn't my hope.
Oh, okay, but that's okay. But you know, it's kind of like this power structure.
Right.
How do African American men, black men, rein that in and establish their own identities around masculinity? Or are you subjugated to the larger culture?
What we're doing now is part of it. We have to be in public. I think men have to take leadership in talking about some of these issues with each other in a way that people can see, because too often when men get together, they start, doing the, machismo thing, and cats don't want to keep it real about what's actually going on. We certainly have some experts here. We're going to hear about Men at Work, the brother, what Brother Rasu is doing. One thing I found is that when we talk about our young men, right, they're actually deeply hungry for something better.
Yes.
Even though the media is not giving them, but I work with students at college. I teach at NYU. I'm working with young people, and I work with young people outside in various community organizations in Philly and Los Angeles and different places here in New York. And as soon as you get around young men and give them a moment to say, I'm paying attention to you, and you let them know, like, I see you, you can take this mask off and listen. They're thirsty for that. I think they want it. It takes a little while to break through the layers, to break through the armor. You know what I mean, that we all have. I mean, honestly, when I'm out in the world, it takes time for me to break through my own armor sometimes, right? So I think that...
and what does your armor look like? Because when I'm in the world, I don't know about armor. What do you mean when you say your armor? I
study this stuff, and all of that, but the reality of it is that, I too am someone who is in community and wants approval, I have a beautiful, wonderful wife and a daughter. I want my wife to, to respect me, you know what I mean? So, and I want my wife's family to respect me. I remember when I was, when I got married, and my father-in-law looked at me. He was like, "Brother, take care of your family." And I just, I felt this thing all of a sudden, like, I felt like I wanted to strap up, get the gun, and you know what I'm saying? Like, it's like, and of course that's not the only. And as we've learned on different episodes of your show, like, the gun is probably the thing that's endangering your family.
Right.
But, I think that, that armor is that sense that, as Rasu was saying, like, you can't show emotions. If I'm feeling emotional, I gotta be strong, I gotta lead with my physical force. You know, what makes me strong is not the fact that, you know, like I got a PhD and I study and I'm, you know, and I'm actually kind of, you know what I'm saying? Like I'm somebody who's, you know, I'm kind of silly person. I like to laugh. Don't lead with any of that. What I got to lead with is force, my ability to impose force on another person, you know, because I'm also a bigger brother, you know what I mean? So it's like those lessons, that's what my armor looks like. And it's right there for me to invoke at any moment. You know, I've trained myself over time to realize to say that's there with me because this is what society has made me into, but I don't have to, that's not who I have to be.
Right, that's not how you have to show up. Let's talk about men at work healing. How are you addressing some of the issues that Chenjerai just brought up?
To even like weave it with the question you asked before is to really think about, meditate, contemplate, and reimagine masculinity. I see one of the biggest issues is masculinity needed an upgrade chip a long time ago,
Yeah.
right? However, everyone outside of the masculine principle, again, however you identify, and so we hear from feminists, we hear from women, we hear from our mothers, we hear from our daughters, we hear from the queer community, everyone, right? But the contemplation needs to be a self-contemplative moment. I mean, we literally, like hyenas, we dissect all of those moments, you know, everything from the Will Smith slap to Kanye's rants to being divorced to being a single father, being outside of a trope of what masculinity is, to, you know, even men coming out in our ciphers, right? Like literally, you know, it's the first time I'm saying it. You know, I'm bi, I'm this and that. Like all of that happens in that cipher because it's about creating that container, right? That container for men to contemplate their own identities. We don't have time to contemplate our own identities. There's also an affliction to masculinity. So we're constantly playing the defense.
What do you mean affliction?
Just to kind of unpack what you just asked, is I'm a male-bodied person, self-identified male-bodied person, and I often exist in spaces that are predominantly women, right? In the arts, you know, in social justice and so on. So what happens as soon as I step in the room is often, here comes the dude, here comes the patriarchy, right? And
Now,
that used to offend me initially, but then I also understood.
Are you sure that's what's going on?
No, literally, I've had people say it
that.
out loud,
Okay.
right?
Okay.
Or assume
Right.
my disposition, or here comes a cis male. And I was like, well, did I actually identify as cis male? Do you know that?
Right.
So we're talking about choosing pronouns and choosing identity, but you've already projected a term on me. What the affliction is to actually think about, oh, society has given us all these attributes without us unpacking it for ourselves, and what that does to the psyche and the male contemplation of the self. So I'm turning it over to Daoud.
Our starting point often with a lot of the men is the conversation of how have we been afflicted by manhood. You know what I mean? Because I think that,
And is that like abused by manhood?
yeah.
Okay.
Because manhood is adversarial to boys. You know what I'm saying? Most of the time as you're a boy, once you get a certain age, and even as a child, like I even think of myself, my family was revolutionaries. They were actively Panthers, BLA. I'm protecting my mother and my sisters as a child. You understand what I'm saying? That's at least the idea that's being projected upon me. So therefore, manhood was something I had to become, and being a boy wasn't good enough even when I was a boy. As a boy, I wasn't enjoying being a boy. As a boy, I was chasing manhood. You understand what I'm saying? So it's something that's far-reaching as a child. I can't protect my mother in the street, but I'm still expected to, so then I'm deficient. And most men deal with that in some capacity, whatever you are, whatever culture, whatever, you're not a provider yet. You're not all these things that you're asked to become, and you're holding the weight of, will I be able to do this efficiently? Will I be able to stand up and be a man one day? You know what I'm saying? Until maybe the day you arrive, but it's something that boys struggle with. You know what I'm saying? Their whole boyhood.
I think of energies, right? That's what I think of.
Indeed.
But I don't think the society's thinking
No.
about
No.
it that way.
It doesn't.
And I remember as a kindergartner, and the boys would just be tussling and fighting and everything, and I would be like, ooh, I'm glad I'm not a boy. And then I also didn't want to have to protect and do all the stuff that boys had to do, you know? And so what you're saying is very much resonates. We also had a conversation about how women move into this. Could you talk about
Well,
that?
you know, we live in a toxic patriarchy society, because I'm not going to say patriarchy across the board is toxic. You know what I mean? I don't believe that. But I do think the expression that we live in is a toxic version. Women hold those ideas as well. You know what I'm saying? So women will often project toxic ideas upon men and weaponize it also often, and then pull it back when it's convenient. So a lot of us have also taken on a lot of abuse in certain ways and trying to overcompensate, you know what I mean, because we're trying to be good men. You know what I mean? And that's been taken advantage of to some degree as well, where there's actually lacking the conversation of what is being a good woman as we're trying to be good men.
But there's got to be strategies for what you just spoke
Well, one
about.
of the things that I think was so enlightened about what you said was the ways in which, and this isn't like attacking men or women or masculinity or femininity, but the recognition that female-bodied people, the mothers of the community with that feminine energy, are so often the enforcement agents of that masculinity that
Ooh, enforcement
deprives
agent. Ooh,
enforcement
I didn't know that.
agents.
I did not know
But
that. I
think
had
about
that.
it. If you are taking the worst of the traits and instilling them in your man-child, you are an agent of enforcement, and it's like essentially like the baby boy of it all, right? Whether you are doing it by yourself or working in concert with your community that is other women, or mixed, whatever the village is raising the child, you are the first teacher. And it can't only be up to women, and it's not women's fault, but women also have to realize when the words they're breathing into their sons.
You know what you say, and then I'm gonna let you say this. My son was a little toddler, and he would act up, and my mother-in-law would say, "He's a man. He's just being a man," and that would drive me crazy. I was like, "Oh, this ain't good. This ain't good." But I mean, culturally,
Right.
you know, to your point, you were gonna you were getting in there.
Yeah, no, it just kind of hit a nerve, right? Like, you know, being only son of a single mom, right? Growing up in the 80s in New York City, drug-infested communities. Like, the father figures were either being locked up by and victims of Reaganomics, and, like incarceration, or out in the streets doing what they got to do. So you have a whole epic of young men who are fatherless, right?
And that means something.
And right, but then at the same time, actually having the discussion with my mother as an adult, which is like transformative.
So did she have to be both in her mind?
In her mind, she had to be the man of the household. So she had to take on a toxic masculine performance of a man in order to raise me. So the way that I understood masculinity was like, I had to go outside and handle my business. I have to go do this and that, because my mother was like, you don't go outside and have a fight and walk in here lumped up without making sure the other person's lumped up too. Toxic. So I say it not in part of my language, but that's really toxic, right? If I'm crying, can I get a hug? Like, those are the things I had to unpack. And then as a grown man, unpacking it with my partner, which is not their work,
Interesting.
right? So I say that to say is that there's a whole threshold, a whole epic
What do you
of
mean
men.
when you say not their work?
It's not my partner's work to do the mothering that I never got. You see what I'm saying? So what we call that in the African principle, Yemaja energy, is the ultimate mother, is the mother of the ocean, the mother of all the fishes. There's a nurturing that is necessary for a man as well, right? So you need the masculine and the feminine principle to be present to be a full man. We believe that. I firmly believe that. Just one principle existing, whether it is a wholesome principle or a toxic principle, does damage to the psyche of any gender.
And I think instead of the way that we've been fed masculine and feminine in opposition,
Absolutely.
instead of in balance, whatever yin and yang or whatever principle from any learned peoples that you want to put on it. And all these masculine men hate women. So many of them hate women and can't honor the feminine in themselves or their woman while they do this performance of masculinity.
But they wouldn't know that they hate women. I don't, I mean,
They don't know that they hate them because that behavior is normalized. When I was younger, I used to call those type of men Romans, but that's a whole other thing. I used to call them Romans.
Okay.
They love masculinity more than anything else. right? They love the toxic expression of it. They have no respect for anything else. They use women for sex. You know what I'm saying? They use women to affirm what they believe their masculinity is, but they don't really enjoy or love the feminine at all. You know what I'm saying? And it's a strange pathology in a lot of ways.
And I just want to say that when you do like deep study, by the way, on fascism, since we're now entering into a fascist era of America, or intensifying fascist tendencies in America, that repression of the feminine is part of that.
Absolutely.
Right? That's why you see all these strong men all across, not just in America, all these so-called strong men who are actually weak people. But I also wanted to say, sometimes I challenge people, because sometimes people will say, well, we just have to talk about positive masculinity. And I say, what's a trait of positive masculinity that I shouldn't teach my daughter?